morning and welcome on. This is our first formal podcast recording for ICAP, the ICAP Chats Podcast, as it's aptly going to be known. Casey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, Megan?
I'm good. You know what? I was inspired by you. I don't know if you noticed this, but I am not on coffee this morning. I'm a bit of a coffee junkie, so this helps me break my habit a little bit. What have you got? You got tea as well?
Nope, I have coffee. I have coffee with oat creamer. I'm enjoying my second cup right now.
Oh my gosh, the roles have reversed. Look at us switch.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are not here to talk about all that stuff with coffee and tea. We are here to talk about the property market. The reinsurance landscape. I know we discussed this briefly. We did a short session on it at the Educational Summit earlier this month. Talked a bit about the fact that we're starting to see more stability across, generally speaking, across most of the casualty coverage lines, right? But the property market seems to be the one that's a little bit more challenging now. Market conditions are hardened. Would you say that's a fair statement, Casey?
Yeah, I think liability continues to be an issue because we continue to see some significantly severe liability claims. But I think that even without losses present in a particular entity, pricing is still going to go up on the property side, regardless of loss experience, just because the marketplace is so difficult.
If you just read the headlines about some of the property market stuff right now, it's easy to understand why. I think one of the things that really struck me, the convective storm and tornado activity in the first 3 months of the year alone, it's set a record for the most tornadoes in the 3-month period, and it surpassed the record that was set 2016 or 17, I believe. When you look at that alone, and then you segue into the discussions we've had about inflation and valuations, and money doesn't go as far as it used to, and a lot of things aren't valued at the appropriate limits right now. I think it's really easy to understand why the property market is so tough.
Absolutely. And I think that the supply chain issue continues to be a problem because you lose a building and now you have to find builders to put it back up, and they have to find the materials to put it back up. And all of those things are taking a lot more time and a lot more money. I heard the other day that it takes, if you put an order out for a fire truck, a decent size fire truck, then you could wait up to 2 years for that. And if you think about the extra expense associated with that waiting, because now you have to rent another fire truck until your fire truck comes in, there's an expense there that really isn't considered when you're looking at things oftentimes. And so the extra expense has also been a killer, I think, in the property market because of that supply chain issue.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that. That wait, that time lag in between need and receiving on some of those things.
Yeah, we had a fair 2 years ago. I think it's been 2 years ago now. They lost all of the lighting around their track, and they couldn't get that lighting in, so they had to rent temporary lighting, which was thousands of dollars a month.
Wow.
I have zillions of examples of that. The time expense is very expensive right now.
It's alarming, and it's relevant, and it's timely, and I think it's definitely something, I said this at the summit, and I said this at our last, our agent meeting in April. It's not an exciting topic, right? No one wants to sit down and think about valuation. Oh, I said that. I did say that right before an actuary. I was like, no one wants to think about numbers. And then an actuary presented at the Educational Summit. So that was ironic timing. Foot and mouth again, Megan. But it's not generally something, particularly when everyone is so busy and everyone's got these long to-do lists, and going through valuations and working through numbers and making sure everything is not only valued appropriately, but making sure everything's listed, right? You have to have all of your buildings listed. You have to have the right limits in place for them. You need to go through your auto schedules. It takes a lot of time and effort, but it is so important. And I think it's really important to be talking about. We have to really be looking at these things right now. Casey, you're much more adept at talking about values than I am. We want to ensure that we can continue to secure the right levels of reinsurance, across the board. But talking about property specifically right now, what do our members need to be looking at or thinking about?
That's a great question. I oftentimes sound like a broken record because I talk property a lot and I talk property values a lot. And I bet you, I have been talking about this for at least 10 years. I think what I'm hearing from the industry is that appraisals are going to be required, meaning that there is going to be a requirement for rolling appraisals for our members. And that is something that will help keep value as appropriate. And we have a couple of things in the air, but we're also working to help members value their larger equipment, because their larger equipment, the carriers care about it all. I care about the larger equipment as a general rule, because the larger equipment is where replacement cost affects things a little differently. And so when you talk about what we have to do, I think appraisals on additional properties, so your large heavy equipment as well as your buildings and your contents, are going to make, if we have adequate values, I think the carriers will become more comfortable with things and know that if the values are adequate, then they're actually seeing what their exposures are, versus right now, a lot of entities, not necessarily ICAP members, because we have provided appraisals in recent years. And so ICAP's values, even with the increase in inflation, we've kept that up with inflation guard and things. But I think in general, public entities might be deficient in their values, and carriers are looking at that going, okay, well, we really don't know. We really don't know what that building is valued at, and we don't know what our exposure is because we don't know what the value is. And so carriers, you might have a building that's listed at $1 million, and because of supply chain issues, if it hasn't been appraised recently, it actually might cost $3 million to replace. So carriers are uncomfortable right now because they look at their statement of values, which is the document that lists out each building and the values associated with that. They don't know what their true exposure is, and they're finding that oftentimes when they have losses, that true exposure is greater, far greater sometimes, than what's actually listed on the statement of values. So I took a long time to get around to that, but basically carriers aren't comfortable because they don't feel they have the true risk or know the true risk of what exposures that their entities represent or their clients represent.
I think the larger conversation is really important, and I think that the conversation about different means of valuation and what is a blanket limit and what purpose does it serve, how do you get to the blanket limit, what should go into getting to that limit in terms of not just individual numbers, but the overall approach to valuation and the different types of valuation. Those are really important conversations, and for folks that don't work in the industry, they can be somewhat challenging concepts, I think. I know even my husband and I were talking about, we're going through the home insurance renewal process right now, which I know I mentioned this the other day. I knew to expect an increase, right? I mean, yeah, I knew to expect an increase, and yet my jaw still dropped when I saw what the increase was, because we haven't had a claim. We bought our house less than a year ago, so the valuation really hasn't changed. We haven't altered any deductibles. We haven't changed any of our coverages. Everything is, copy paste from the last year. And yet we see what I'm trying to think of the percentage. It was probably about a 25% increase from a year ago. And so I go in my head, I'm primed to expect this. I'm primed to expect this. And you open it up and you go, holy cow, I know to expect an increase, but it's still shocking when we see it. So anyways, I think that the conversations about, the increases, but the overall market, but the means of valuation, those are the different forms of valuation. When we talk about replacement cost and actual cash value, stated amount, there are these different forms of valuation that I think are really important for people to understand, not just when it comes to looking at, ICAP statement of values or your municipal statement of values and going, how do we assign coverage for this? We should all understand it on a personal level as well, because those various means of coverage do play into our own personal lines of coverage.
And, it's just not, you mentioned it early on, it's not something exciting to talk about. And people don't want to sit down and go through it. But we can help. We have the skills. I mean, the pricing is what it is. And when I talk about carrier's comfort, obviously ICAP is a carrier, but we have reinsurance, and that's where that becomes important, is those carriers provide reinsurance. And if that cost is going up, obviously the price for ICAP members has to go up. But I would say that there are ways that we can help members achieve their goals for coverage and help them save money where possible. But more importantly, at least to me, is to make sure that they have the coverage that they think they have at the time of a loss. And the only way to do that is to have the conversation before the loss, not after.
Oh, definitely. Timing is everything, right? Well, not everything, because as we said, those valuations are important too, but timing is really, really important. Too little, too late is a long used expression for a reason, right? Casey, you're right. There are so many ways. So we have a slide deck from a session we hosted last year that very clearly spells out the different means of valuation. We're happy to share that with anyone. We do 101 sessions for both members and agents. Casey, you manage and host those. Is that a good opportunity for folks if they have questions, even if they want to dig in? They go, right, I don't want to go through anything else, but I do want to understand this property discussion and the valuations and the estimates and all of this stuff. How can they go about arranging something for that?
It is so easy. They can just reach out to me or their underwriter or their agent. If they want to reach out to their agent and say, hey, we would love to engage ICAP to help us with some property analysis. And we can do it a multitude of ways, but we can do it remote. We can come on site. We can take as much time or as, I think the minimum amount of time we would require is about an hour to go through it. If you have a large entity, it's going to take longer. But if you really want to dig in, I would come to that location and we would sit down. I've gone into cities where we bring in department heads and we spend the whole day talking through the schedules and the buildings with each department head so that they are weighing in too, which is really important. That county auditor or city clerk can't be the one that's responsible for everything. The department heads oftentimes need to weigh in, and they're busy too, and they have things to do, but this is a really important step to make sure they have the coverage when they need. And so there's a variety of ways we can do it. We can meet their needs as far as the method of meeting, but I'm always happy to meet and talk about particular valuations for a member or their appraisals, etc.
And I expect this appraisals discussion is going to be something that's ongoing. We're talking about, appraisals and property values or assessments is another word for individual buildings and structures and equipment. But I think that that's one element of a much larger conversation. And it's probably something that we're going to hear come up over the next several years. We know, right? We said this, we included it in our market update. The property market has been tagged, not by us, but amongst the industry, as the hardest in a generation. And so we know that this is unfortunately likely to get worse before it gets better. Carriers, as you said, or coverage providers are going to be working to try to sort of catch up, if you can, from some of the losses that have occurred. And this just isn't just Iowa specific or ICAP specific. We're talking about, the hurricanes that have hit, the floods that have hit, the earthquakes that have hit. I know some of these things they're in different countries, right? They're on different continents, but as we know at this point, as we hopefully all know and understand, all of those different events, the global activity really does impact the overall industry as a whole. And that, like we've said previously, has a trickle-down effect, right? We've talked at length about the reinsurance structure and why it's so important. Those higher layers, those higher levels feel some of those global activities, which means that trickling down, we feel them too, albeit very indirectly. So anyways, as we know that this market is hard, we know that things are likely to get a little bit harder over the next year, 2 years. There's a window of time, but making these efforts right now, bringing those valuations up, making sure these appraisals are done, making these efforts now are going to go a really long ways towards the long-term health, not just of ICAP, but of our individual members as well.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, one thing I didn't mention is previously to just in the last couple of months, ICAP's only been able to provide individual appraisals on buildings of certain types. So we could, on just general buildings in nature, now we have the capability of running valuations on buildings including wastewater and water and ornate buildings, which we used to have to bring a specialized group in. Now we still engage a specialized group, but our risk control folks will collect all the information on a building or many buildings and send that information into this specialized group that can run appraisals for us. So there are some ways that we can do things that aren't necessarily pool wide. If it's an individual member, we can help with those values individually. And all of these steps help control your property pricing. So if you take these steps, if a member goes through these steps and makes sure that their property's in line, they've reviewed their statement of values, those things really do help. And not just in making sure you have the coverage when you have a claim, but also it can help pricing.
Such an important offering and a beneficial offering, of the program, of the pool, and definitely something that members should take advantage of. And that's just one of many risk control services that are out there. I think it's important to look at. I think it's important to evaluate the options. I think it's important to talk to your risk control specialist and your underwriter and to Casey and really figure out what your entity individually, right? Because it's not one size fits all. So what your individual entity needs now and what your entity needs to have valued and appraised and assessed, and what you need to do to make sure your limits are up to par. I think we're going to hear more about this, Casey. I suspect if we see a flurry of member inquiries, it might be something that we look to hold a short live overview session on at some point in the coming months.
I think that's a good idea.
Members, agents, remember you can always contact your ICAP representatives if you have questions, if you need individualized help, if you want to learn more. And otherwise, Casey and I are always here as well, and you hopefully know where to find us. If not, check out our contact information below, and as always, let us know if there's anything you need. Thank you.